Hi folks, before the episode starts, I'd like to apologize for the audio quality. We had some difficulty recording this episode, but luckily we had a backup recorder going. We decided that despite the issues with the audio quality, that we were going to go ahead and post this episode anyway, because we really thought we had some good discussions about technique. For the same reason, if you normally watch the video version of this podcast, there will be no video version of this episode. Thank you. Welcome back to another episode of the Piano Pedagogy podcast. I'm Jacqueline Beckoff, and with me, as always, is Arianne Lacra. We both own successful piano studios in Southern California, and I also owned Defined Music Teacher. How are things going, Arianne?
Things are going all right. No complaints. It's a nice, sleepy, rainy day over here. Just got back from the gym, feeling really motivated. How have things been with you?
They've been pretty good. Not a cloud in the sky today where I am here. So we'll see if we get some rain later on. So what's been going on this week in your studio?
Well, in the studio, I've gotten to work with a few new students. They're going well. Their lessons are going well so far. I might have one new one this week as well. So just filling out my calendar, doing some substitute teaching, and getting to know some new faces and preparing some more familiar faces that I've been teaching for a few years now for their own talent shows at school, things like that.
Awesome. Is that substitute teaching for our mutual friend?
Yes.
All right. Now, how's that substitute teaching going? I've never done substitute teaching. I've always thought I don't know. And I've had periods where I've had to be out for a while, and it was like a month and a half, and I just didn't do the substitute teaching. How's that going for you?
It's going good. It's convenient because it's over Zoom. So even though those students were not Zoom students for our friend, the nature of the absence is such that the client was willing to just say, hey, yeah, sure, agree to a virtual lesson for the sake of convenience and things like that. So we do it bright and early on Saturday mornings, 8 to 9 a.m.
Ooh, that's so early.
I know, but you know what? It's worth it because then I get a head start on my mornings. And yeah, as piano teachers, we usually aren't morning people if that's the only thing that we do, or especially if we're gigging, right? But that's okay.
What's it like to teach another person's student? I mean, I've taken transfer students, but with a transfer student, you're looking to reshape that student and help them adapt to the way you do things. But I would imagine that's not how you do substitute teaching.
Right. Well, as long as there's a solid teacher notes, I'd say, left behind by the regular teacher, things go pretty smoothly. You get the books that you need. Sometimes if it's a last minute substitute teaching job, because I've done a lot of subbing actually for my colleagues at community music schools throughout the years, sometimes it could be a last minute struggle to obtain materials if the substitute job was put in requested last minute. But unless it's over Zoom, that's not an issue. If it is over Zoom, the biggest concern for me would be to obtain the lesson books and stuff on time that the students typically use if I don't already have them in my library. And for that, I rely on, and this is not a paid, this is not a sponsored message.
Is it the piano teacher Atlas thing?
Scribd.
Oh, Scribd.
They usually have a lot of the Piano Adventures books available, so, if you're a member, you can have access to all kinds of sheet music on Scribd.
I thought you were going to shill for the Piano Adventures Teacher Atlas thing that they launched during COVID.
Oh, you know what? I'm not even sure if I'm aware of that, but...
It's high quality digital scans of, not scans, just digital images of all of the piano books in the Faber Piano Adventures library.
Oh.
It's like $15 a month, I think, and you get access to like all the different languages, the international versions, and all the different stuff. But I have just a bookcase filled with books, so I've never had to use it. During COVID, actually, I got into the habit of, well, obviously I had to buy books. I didn't keep books, copies of all the students' books at that point. But now that I'm back in person, I have my copy of my book over at my piano, and then they're over there on the other side of the room. They have their copies of their books, and I can't imagine how I used to squint to see their sheet music before. It's crazy how COVID just kind of changed things.
Oh, it really did. What a big shift in the way that we went about piano teaching.
Yeah.
Evaluations even.
I think it's so cool because the Zoom lessons, they were way less socially acceptable then, right? Before COVID, they were way less socially acceptable. And I think that most people would balk at the idea of, oh yeah, we're doing an online lesson. That's crazy. Like, how are we supposed to do that online, right? And now if my students get sick, it's something that is way more socially accepted. So,
yes.
Well, I don't think we should meander too much. We were talking right before we started recording about something that I've been doing, working on this week. So to recap that, I was telling Arianne that in August, when I plan to update my contract and do my price raise for the year, that I want to try to get away from having my different tuition options, for half hour, 45-hour, or the twice a week, be just like the length of a lesson, right? Have them just like the only difference be this is a longer lesson, right? Inspired a little bit by like a gym membership, when you have the more expensive option, you can bring a friend, right? It's like you get something else. So I've been in talks with my piano technician, the guy that I use. He's incredible at what he does. To offer a discount to some of my students on, with the longer lessons, the more expensive options, offer an ongoing discount if they get their piano tuned from him, that they would get a discount on that. And crunching the numbers, it seems like, well, how could I afford to do that? But I mean, they would have to have a grand piano or like an acoustic piano, and I did the numbers. Not many of my students have an acoustic piano. This is just a small subset. So I think that it's like a feature that will look attractive on paper and will be interesting to people, but I don't think the majority of people will actually be able to take advantage of it. So that's where we were. So what were you asking me before we before we started recording?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was in the midst of a conversation. Now I'm kind of blanking, but I think it was just something along the lines of, how's it going? Figuring how did you
right?
How did you think about? How did you think to make these changes? Did you get any inspiration from outside, or was it something that you spontaneously thought of on your own?
Well, I think that part of it is. Over the last 5 years that I've really been teaching full time, I suppose 7 years, I've always had this idea that once a year, I'm always pushing for this ideal price that I want to have, right? Because I think when I first started teaching way back, I guess it's like close to 7, 8, 9 years now, I was charging $30 for an hour lesson, right? So I think we can all think back to those very early stages when we were charging very little, and we were driving and just all of these things. But I always had this idea that I wanted to have a certain price in mind, and I always felt like in order to raise prices by a significant portion, you need to have something to accompany it, right? You need to have like, this is the cool thing, now give me more money every month, right? And I guess part is like I don't say I'm running out of cool things to add, but like I was just trying to brainstorm what is something that would be interesting that would help justify that higher cost for the hour lessons, because it's a jump, right? It's pretty easy for people to get people to go from half hour to 45s, but then the 45 to the hour is sometimes a trickier jump for us. So I was just brainstorming like, what can I do to help make that seem more attractive? And I love John. I love him. He does incredible work. And so I figured I would just shoot my shot and see what he said. And now we've been talking about that.
Amazing. Well, good luck on that journey.
Yeah.
Nicely.
So let's get to our topic then, right? We have to get to our topic. We can't just keep talking. We got to talk about our topic. So, our topic today is, we're just going to do one big topic. We're trying something new. Normally we do two topics, but now we've decided to just focus on one big topic together. And that big, massive topic is technique. I don't really have a whole lot in mind. Normally I come in with like an idea of what I'm going to talk about here, but I'm doing it blind because this is such a massive topic, and I'm not really even sure where to start. I have one thing in mind that I wanted to talk about. From there, we're just going to have to see where it goes. So, what about you? Do you have an idea of where we're going with this gigantic topic?
Well, I think sometimes it's a good plan to just come into a podcast with all those years of experience and knowledge and just see where the conversation takes us. So my only thing that I really wanted to touch on is, I wanted to ask you a question about how you go about correcting a certain habit that many beginner students have, which is maybe approaching the keyboard with flat fingers or things like that for the very first few weeks. Wanted to see if you had any tips and tricks to help them articulate better, practice better form, and so on. Other than that, I'm open.
Okay, well, I suppose that ties into the one thing that I wanted to talk about, which was technique gestures. Are you familiar with technique gestures, Arianne?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So the Piano Adventures technique books, they incorporate technique secrets. Do you use the Piano Adventures technique book?
Not particularly, but I've definitely heard of a few, maybe Cheerios, flies, water.
Right. I mean, it's not a revolutionary concept, but they have them built into the Piano Adventures method, and I think that the way to get. Oh, you're going to laugh. I have a funny story to tell you about this. That the way to help students get good technique is less to correct it and more to set the tone for it, right? Now, just kind of like we start off, and this is how we play the piano, right? So just defining that from the early stage, like we don't play the piano with flat fingers, right? So it's less of like you gotta stop doing that, you gotta stop doing that, and it's more like it's a habit that I don't ever really allow to develop, right? They have their technique secret for hand shape from Piano Adventures is a blooming flower. You start with a fist, and then you let your fist bloom out into an open flower. So I'll just often remind my students in the early stages to make that blooming flower shape, and it doesn't really, I suppose it's not really that much of a battle, right? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I think it does. if you nip it in the bud before it even becomes a habit, then you won't have to spend all that time breaking bad habits. I get a lot of transfer students who have collapsed knuckles and things like that, and that's where it's just I go through so much grief trying to have them unlearn that, because it is muscle memory.
Yeah.
But I like that idea of the blooming flower. I'm going to have to look into those technique and artistry books and look at that and see more.
Yeah, they have for each level they have a different set of technique secrets, and at the later levels they actually have some very interesting ones. They have one called the up touch, which I've incorporated into my lessons with my adult students. They don't have the technique secrets in the adult book, but the up touch is the idea that when you play a staccato note, that after you go up, you're touching your next note, right? Or it's not just limited to staccato notes, right? It's, there was, I have a student working on an etude, it's Tolling Bells, I think, or it's like Opus 46 something by, I can't remember his name, but the idea is that you have this left hand down on the bass, and then you cross over, you play a treble note, and then you come back down, right? So the idea is that even though the next note doesn't happen on that beat, after you lift the note, you come up, you go and you touch the next note, because that next note isn't supposed to be loud. So instead of dropping in on that note with a lot of force, you are silently reaching your hand to touch it before it's needed, and then you play it softly. So that's one of the more advanced technique secrets, but it's really a wonderful. It's very diverse. It's useful for so many different situations.
Yeah, that's powerful. Cool. So I'm having kind of a hard time picturing that technique, although I'm sure if I saw it, I would.
Do you want me to demonstrate it? I can demonstrate it.
Sure. Especially for those of us who are watching on YouTube, maybe on our websites.
Here, let me. 1 second.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I just wasn't expecting. See, that's what happens when you go into something without any expectations. You're unprepared.
It is a lot more fun this way, though, I gotta admit.
All right. Now, let's see here. Is it going to just zoom in on my face again? Yeah, it is. I got to turn off my auto frame thing. Otherwise, it'll just zoom in on me. How do I turn off that thing? Why don't we keep talking, and then I'll figure out how to turn this thing off. I'm one of those incompetent people, Arianne. Those incompetent people that I used to make fun of. Like, oh, you don't know how your technology works? Oh, God, it's me.
Honestly, I've tried. I have no idea how to turn that off either.
I think it's nice. I like it to an extent, but it's not the easiest thing to turn on and off. Here it is. Automatic framing. Off.
You got it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yes. All right. So the up touch in this context, the piece is like, right. So instead of doing that, I'll tell you what, if I'm doing this, I might as well do the whole thing. Let me get the book. Let me get the book so that I can actually play it. There it is. Play it correctly.
Okay.
Is it still framing on me? Oh, it is, isn't it? Oh, man. I thought I stopped that.
It's a little bit better, though.
No. No, don't do it.
For those of you that are just listening, what's happening?
You think we're crazy. That's what you think.
Every time Jackie is sitting down, the camera is like...
Oh, I found my face again.
And then in toward everything but the piano. There you go. Okay,
here we go. So, this etude is Distant Bells, Opus 63, number 6 by Straybog. Here we go. So, this is what it would be like without the technique secret. But with the uptouch that I was describing, it becomes this. So you're instead moving to that note far before it's actually needed, because you're coming up and then you're touching it. It's also good for like staccato notes when you're trying to do like a bunch of piano chords, right? Because if you come up, then you come back down, you're going to get the accent. So you're always touching that before you actually need to play it again.
That's pretty useful. Actually, as a matter of fact, I remember using a similar explanation last week for someone who is in the Piano Adventures primer level lesson book. Thank you for demonstrating all of that. He was doing the moving up the escalator and balloons, so and at that stage, students often don't know when the right time is to cross their hands over. So I just advise them, if you're doing C, D, E, cross, C, D, E, cross under, C, D, E, that kind of thing all across the whole entire keyboard is the crosshand technique, pretty standard. My piece of advice is always just get your other hand moving while, depending on which hand is playing. So if your right hand is on the keyboard, your left hand is busy crossing over in that arc shaped trajectory and path and so on, and vice versa.
Yeah, there's a piece, I don't know if it's in the technique book for primer. It's called Catch Me If You Can. It has both hands starting in the middle C position with the thumbs on middle C, but then both hands are moving up. So right hand's doing a pattern G, F, E, D, C, and the left hand is doing F, G, A, B, C. And the trick is that you're not allowed to have your left hand thumb catch your right hand thumb by playing the same key until the very end of the piece. So you have these two measures in which the right hand needs to move before the left hand gets to that C, otherwise the left hand is catching the right hand early.
Interesting. Oh, that reminds me of my lecture recital where Florence Price had, I think, something similar going on in a piece, the name of which I'm blanking on, but it was one of her teaching pieces. By the way, since we're doing a piano pedagogy podcast, I want to quickly plug the subject of my research, which was pedagogical works of Florence Price. She's really coming into the mainstream now. Piano Magazine has talked about her quite a lot. People are beginning to recognize her symphonic works in the concert music world more than they ever did before on an international level. Her works are acknowledged in the more advanced levels of the RCN repertoire, I believe. But that said, a lesser known fact about her is that she also wrote a lot of teaching pieces for the younger and more beginner level students in her studio in Chicago. So definitely check that out if you have the time.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting that a lot of modern day composers, for piano anyway, they start off by writing pedagogical pieces for their own students, and their logic is, I know exactly what this student needs to do, so instead of trying to find a teaching piece that fits this, why don't I just write it? And I've only ever done that once or twice because I don't want to say I'm lazy, but it's a lot of work. But there have been certainly situations where I'm like, I know exactly what my student needs. I should just write it down. Actually, a student for one of my autistic students, he's minimally verbal. They took they had to take a month and a half off, and it has been a bit of a struggle coming back because he has like when a student takes a month off, they lose a lot, but lose something. But for him, he's lost a lot of the note reading that we had built up, and I've just been using a big whiteboard with him and trying to correct issues like mixing up treble G and bass G. He knows it's a G, but he's mixing up which one it is. So I've just written the pieces. So I suppose I do write my own pieces for my students. But back to the topic at hand, Arianne. You will not distract me. I'm going to stay focused. I'm going to be laser focused. What were you saying?
Sorry. Who is not going to distract whom?
You're not distracting me. I'm not going to fall for it. I'm not getting off topic.
Oh, yeah, my tangents. I know I need to work on.
Hang on, let me get my charger. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Anyway, audience, I was just kind of saying if it's totally okay as a teacher to do kind of what Jacqueline was doing with that student, which is just to create. I think if I'm understanding correctly, you're creating things for the student to do, if not on the spot, then, something that requires less effort on the teacher's part. Maybe you don't have to actually write anything down, but you can supply directives to a student who might be struggling with one very specific thing, and you don't have any external teaching piece that comes to mind by someone else, so you make a directive or an exercise or a piece yourself. That is a life hack, I would say, that I've learned over the years. And you do it too, so that's nice. I feel validated. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure how much of that got garbled, but my computer was lagging because it wasn't plugged in. So, but I was saying that that's how a lot of modern day piano composers seem to get started, by writing pieces for their students, and then I was telling a story about that. But let's get back to the topic at hand here, Arianne. You're not going to distract me this week. Piano technique. I'm putting my foot down. We have to talk about piano technique. I'm glad someone is more structured around here. I'm the free bird in this whole interaction.
So we were talking about gestures, right? And you asked me about correcting technique, and I told you I had a funny story about it. So we'll try not to get too off on too much of a tangent, but basically, have you ever used nonverbal cues with your students?
Every day of my life, yeah.
Right. So, what do you use nonverbal cues for?
Well, actually, a lot of my lessons are very quiet because I try to keep the talking to a minimum, because I know that if I were being talked at, or if someone was saying a lot to me, I would probably just zone right out during a lesson if I were the student. What I do, let's say someone is repeatedly playing a passage with, and they're maybe mistaken about a note, especially at the intermediate to advanced level, I might just reach in there and just correct it by demonstrating only, without saying a word. And I make a little gesture beforehand so that they know that I'm going in. I'm going into the keyboard. They won't be caught off guard. And it's during a time when they have paused, or for a young'un, even somebody who's misbehaving, or someone who's just getting started, like a kindergartner. I hate saying things like, don't do that. We don't do that, I know you got it sometime, but I try to just say,
yeah.
Like Cosmo Kramer noises. If you guys are familiar with Seinfeld, he does a lot of just nonverbal vocalization that gets the point across so effectively without even having to say a word. Plus, it cracks the students up too, and they forget whatever they were doing, and kind of they're grounded again. So.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what this nonverbal cue that I'm talking about is. And okay, I'm warning you, it's going to sound bad at first. All right, it's going to sound terrible at first. My nonverbal cue is that I throw things at my students. All right, just wait. Do you see? I told you, all right? I told you. So, the way it works is that I take one of my dry erase markers and I tell my student, if I see one of your fingertips collapse, I'm going to throw this at you.
Oh my God.
And that is exactly how they respond. They're like, you wouldn't throw that at me. And I'm like, you just watch me. Your mom's sitting right over there. She's hearing every word I'm saying. She's clearly okay with me throwing this marker at you. And they'll be like, no. Well, just try me. And then inevitably they'll play their section, their scale or whatever, and I'll see a flattened fingertip and I'll throw it right at their body. And they'll be like, you threw the marker at me. And I said, I warned you that I would. Why didn't you believe me? And I said, every time in this lesson that I see a flat finger, I'm going to throw this marker at you. And I'm going to place this right here on the piano, just in case I need it. And they'll be like, no. And they'll just have this they typically find it hilarious, right? They'll typically cracking up, right? And I have to make sure that I don't use this with a particularly sensitive student, unless we've already established that relationship. But I'm very funny in my piano lessons. Either I'm very funny, or they're all really afraid of hurting my feelings, so they all laugh when I make my jokes. I just think I'm funny, but they're always cracking up in the lessons. So this is not out of character for me, right? I can be very serious, but I don't like to be serious. I don't like to have the heavy conversations, right? I like to play, right? These kids, they're kids, right? They're little kids. So anyway, they'll focus on it, and I'll catch them another couple of times, and then the next week at their lesson, without saying anything, I'll just place my marker on the piano, and I'll look at them, and they'll look at me, and they'll be like, why is the marker here? And I said, you know why the marker's here? Play your piece.
Oh my Lord.
And it's very effective. It's very effective. I have this one student. He was what was that?
Where did you learn this? Did your teacher do that?
I started thinking about using, I use props in my piano lessons, all right? I have a magnifying glass that I'll bring out. If a student misses something, I'll come over there and I'll be like, is there something there that I'm not seeing? Because you played that really soft. And it doesn't look like it's supposed to be soft. Is there something that I'm missing? And I'll get really up close to the music. Or I have this little round fabric thing that says slow down on it. It's supposed to be like a vibe you put up on your wall and says slow down. And I'll just sometimes put that on the music stand for the student if they need to slow down. So I use these nonverbal cues, and I use these props to be funny again, but I don't know. I cannot pinpoint the moment where I was like, let's just throw something. Let's just throw something at this child that is in my care for this half an hour. I'll throw something. That'll be good. I mean, I had teachers in school that would throw markers when we fell asleep. So maybe that inspired me. I don't know, but it's very effective because I had this student. He's a little kid. He's 10 now. He was 9 when he came to me. His mom's very passionate about his lessons, and he came to me and he was playing intermediate repertoire when he had no business playing intermediate repertoire, right? He was a transfer student, and he had none of the technique to play that stuff. He had none of the learning skills to play that stuff. And I've had a long-standing arrangement with him that if he doesn't count before he begins, I throw a marker at him. And he doesn't miss that nearly as much as he used to before I instituted our long-standing agreement.
Okay, well, you know what? That's interesting because I'm I'm a violin teacher too, so I'd say about 75% of my students right now are piano students and about 25% are violinists. And when I was in middle school orchestra, we had an award-winning instructor who, like, I would say has changed so many of his students' lives. So many of his students went on to become professional string players, things like that. It was just a very inspiring class. And at the same time, he was also a middle school orchestra teacher for a giant public magnet school. And so there were like 40 of us in one orchestra classroom for the hour that we had orchestra period. And the number of times where he had to just throw his baton across the room just to get everybody's attention. I mean, his teaching was very effective, and yet, you know, it's 40 kids in one room who have their besties there with them, and they're noodling around while the teacher is supposed to be focusing on helping out the cellists or helping out the second violin section with something. So, you know, we could have the best of intentions as students, but we still goofed off. I used to goof off.
Yeah, we all goofed off. Yeah, absolutely.
You gotta do it, because sometimes, you know, it's, I don't know about throwing directly at an orchestra student, but he would definitely, like, throw some markers against the wall sometimes when he got really agitated or frustrated with our lack of attentiveness with him. Another nonverbal cue. I'm so glad you brought up nonverbal cues.
They're so nice because the verbal cues, they're so obtrusive. They are so obtrusive. They are annoying, and no student wants to hear 6-7 times in a lesson, keep your fingers strong. Don't flatten your fingertips. Make sure you count before you begin. No one wants to hear that, right? So, I mean, just having a sign that says count before you begin, like, and just raise it up at them, right? That's, if you do it in a funny way, right? Like, it's funny, and it's a good reminder, right? I'm not suggesting that anybody, I want to make this clear, I'm not suggesting, nor am I responsible for anything that happens if anyone listening to this podcast decides to throw something at a student. I am not suggesting you do that. I still can't believe that I get away with it. And if you do, well, tell us about it, I guess, because
know who to do it with. You know, you have to use your discretion and know who it is you're dealing with, how long you've had a rapport with that student and their parents, and so on.
Yeah. I had a student, okay, I'm getting off topic here. You're distracting me again. I had a student, a transfer student, an evaluation come in, and she tells me on the phone, they really liked their piano teacher, but he told her that he would chop off her fingers if she didn't memorize her piece. And she didn't like that.
Yeah, so again, you know, case by case basis. And what I was getting at is, I use a nonverbal cue for my violin students when they're first learning how to do something called retakes. A retake or a breath mark, that is something written in the score, usually signified by an apostrophe, where you play a down bow, and then you gotta replace your bow where it was
before
and
the
play
episode
another
starts,
down bow.
I'd like to apologize
So
for the
it's bow
audio
direction
quality.
stuff. Or
We had some
you do an up
difficulty
bow, then you
recording
gotta
this
do another
episode, but luckily we had
two in a row, and you gotta pick
We
up
decided
the bow
that
off the
despite
string,
the issues
move
with
your
the
arm around,
audio quality,
and get it
that
back
we
to
were
where it
going to
needs
go
to
ahead
be.
and post this
Lots of
episode
students
anyway,
miss their retakes
because
when
we
they're
really thought
first
we had some good
learning
discussions about
that
technique.
particular
For
technique.
the same reason,
Because
if you normally watch the video
their
version
beginner
of this
pieces
podcast,
prior to learning
there will be
retakes
no video
don't
version
include
of
that
this episode.
technique.
Thank you.
Which makes me wonder if maybe we should introduce techniques from day one so that it's always incorporated. Anyway, I would put tally marks on the top of the page to kind of signify, hey, I saw a moment where you didn't do a retake. Oh, here's another moment that you were supposed to do a retake that you missed. For every miss, they get a tally mark, and if they get 5 strikes, they're out, or something like that. So you turn it into a game. students are also developing their concept of time, their concept of keeping track of how many times they have missed something in a piece. So if they have that clearly in front of them, that has been way more effective than me saying, hey, you missed your retake. Hey, you got a retake. You missed your retake again. It's particularly with one student. The minute I employed the tally mark game, he never missed another retake again. And yet before that game, before I started using that game on him, he wasn't registering at all. So it was like night and day. And that's another, even just something as simple as a tally mark can make such a big difference when it comes to consistent technique and enforcing consistent technique in a student.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, right? Because it gets rid of the verbal disruption. What they're doing is sound based, right? What they're doing is sound based, and even from an early stage, we're teaching them to be hyper aware of the sounds that they are creating, right? And when they're listening to their sounds, right, and even from an early stage, a 6-year-old is starting to get the idea, this is right, that's not right. That takes a lot of effort, and they're having to I don't want to say strain, but they're pushing their focus and their attention and their ears to a limit, right? So to have someone say in the middle of a piece, keep your fingertips strong, right? It's incredibly disruptive, right? So by using a nonverbal, whether that nonverbal is thrown or not, does help get rid of the interruption. Or I suppose the interruption is still there because they'll start laughing in some cases, but it wasn't it wasn't a sound-based interruption, right? They stopped, they turned their ears off, on their own terms, rather than having their hyper-aware ears pick up on someone's voice in the middle of their piece, right? I think that what you said earlier was interesting about having to use the techniques from the earliest point possible, right? From the earliest point possible. With my very young students, I do several lessons. I do one lesson off book. I do one lesson without the book. It just has improv games and some of the technique stuff, so that they can be looking down at their hands instead of also focusing up on the page. Because we're telling them two contradictory things. Keep your fingertips strong. Well, how am I supposed to know if my fingertips are strong? I'm 6 years old. No one's ever talked to me about my fingertips before, right? I didn't even know I had a fingertip, right? And now I need to do something with this part of my body that I didn't even know I could control. Also, you need to be looking up at the page so that you can do this other thing that you've never done, right? So it's two very different and contradictory things that we're asking these children to learn. So I give them a lesson of improv on the black keys and just talking about that hand shape and keeping your fingertips strong. The other one they have in the Faber Piano Adventures is making O's. You take your finger and you put it to your thumb in an O shape, and you press down and you don't get the collapsed knuckle. So that's another one of the ones that I introduced at the very first lesson, right? Or maybe that's sometimes, no, I typically do the first lesson. The other one is karate pose, which is distance from the piano. And those things become a part of their routine. And then the other one that's introduced early on is thumb perch, the idea of keeping your thumb perched on its side even as you're playing. But I don't typically enforce that one. I don't introduce that one until they've become comfortable with the idea of that hand shape in general. And then the thumb perch is used as a reminder of let's keep that hand shape. So I think that we need to, yes, introduce things as early as possible. Obviously, we're not introducing the up touch at the first lesson, right? So I think that when you first, you can't have them practicing incorrect technique, right? You can't, because if they get a month of flat fingers, you're gonna fight with it forever, right? I mean, it's like you mentioned with transfer students. It's a nightmare, right? It can be a nightmare to get students to use the correct technique. I had a very nice lady. She's one of my long-standing students. She played when she was young, and 20 years later, 30 years later, she wants to come back and she wants to pick it back up. And her technique is awful, right? Her technique is awful. Not only maybe her teacher wasn't very good as a child, or maybe what they were, but now it's degraded over 30 years. And she's played, it's not unfortunately that she's played, she's still played within that time period. And that's reinforced this bad behavior because there hasn't been anyone to correct it. So, I mean, it took years. It took years of just constant vigilance at the piano, at our lessons together, to change her technique, because it was so deeply ingrained. And she still doesn't have the best technique of any of my students, because there's just, I don't want to say damage, but there's some habits that I'm just not, I mean, after like 6 years of lessons, we haven't been able to shake certain habits.
Okay. I know with my older students, sometimes there are issues like arthritis, etc. Would you say anything like that could be going on, or is it just like kind of being rigidly set in one's ways?
I think it's just, I'm not aware of any arthritis, and I assume, maybe not incorrect, maybe assume incorrectly, that she would have told me by now.
Right.
I think I might be exaggerating when I say that some of her technique is still not, she's not bad, right? Her technique is not bad. We've made incredible strides, and she's currently working on the Chopin C-sharp minor nocturne, the posthumous one. It's just some of the things like her fingers, like her pinkies like to fly away during scales. She likes to lift. She likes to do the evil, the Dr. Evil from Austin Powers. Do you know the meme I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. I call that the evil pinky, right? So she likes to do the evil pinky, and we've worked on it, but I think at a certain point, I gave up because we didn't seem to be making any meaningful headway, and I was out of ideas with it. But maybe I'll dive back in and try to correct that. Maybe this podcast episode has inspired me. But would you also agree that your transfer students are the most technically challenging for you?
Pretty much, yeah, in a few cases. Although I gotta say, and I know we disagree about this, but usually I will set my transfer students up with Hannon, just as when I transferred to my most impactful beginner, intermediate, advanced level teacher in grade school. She also, when I was a transfer student, put me on Hannon, and most of my issues fell by the wayside, except for my pinky would curl up like this whenever I did scales. So this problem was not addressed until after I went to boarding school, after I went to college. One teacher I had at the college level sat me down and had a conversation with me for probably about 15 minutes about how to get rid of this. For those of you who are just listening, I'm holding my pinky up in the shape of a curled up little shrimp right here. This was a problem that I used to have in piano. Lots of people do, especially during scales and things like that. And she gave me a group of possible solutions, and told me, you're going to have to very intentionally unlearn this habit through hours and hours of scale practice, where you mentally focus like 95% of all your energy into keeping your pinky straight while you do, not straight, but unshrimped, uncurled up, while you do certain things, while you play certain passages in your repertoire. And it's not going to be easy, but You'll just have to use that brute mental energy to unlearn that habit. Sure enough, after that conversation I had with her, I went in the practice room for hours every single day, did all of my scales that I had been playing with that pinky issue for years, and after a couple of weeks, that issue finally started to go away. And I think it's because she coached me mentally. So a lot of, especially for older students, you can, maybe around late elementary, middle school at least, and up in age, you can coach someone mentally on an issue that they have. Or let's say someone was born with double jointedness. I teach a family of 4 people who were all born with double jointedness in every single knuckle of their finger, especially their large middle knuckle here in each finger. So you can imagine all of the little technique tools that I've had to employ to ensure that in spite of their double jointedness, they can still make that rounded finger shape. And in one student in particular, it is pretty severe. Her fingers are just super elastic, but she's getting better every day because we do stress ball exercises, sometimes pulling back rubber bands that I set up. There's a rubber band and cup exercise that was circulating YouTube a while ago in the piano teacher community that allows you to practice articulation and of each finger individually, especially if you have double jointedness in your knuckles, in your fingers. And those 2 exercises have helped her a lot, because when it comes to theoretical knowledge of what she need to do, she's leaps and bounds ahead of, for better or for worse, where she is technique-wise, and it's through no fault of her own. I mean, I can't imagine being born with total double jointedness in every single digit, you know. But she's still doing it, and I'm very pleased with her progress so far, because we've almost gotten totally rid of anything where the second biggest knuckle collapses inward.
Gotcha. Yeah, that seems like a really good strategy to use, right? The double jointed students, I struggle with students who have different disabilities than I do, right? Because I have a hard time, like for my dyslexic students, I have a hard time imagining what they're seeing, right? I can't see what they see, so I have a hard time helping them. And with my double jointed students, I'm not double jointed, so I have a hard time feeling what they're feeling. So I sometimes have difficulties with that, which can be frustrating, right? It can be very frustrating for that to to not be able to put yourself in their shoes, right? And it sounds like you'll be set up for life now that you've had this family of double-jointed students, that whenever you come across another double-jointed student, you'll just be like, well, I know exactly what I need to do here.
Exactly. And it took a lot of trial and error. And, for all of you guys listening at home who might be running into difficulties that maybe the method books might not have prepared you for, just know that trial and error is your friend. Piano Street Forum, Reddit, all of these communities online that address issues that we don't typically hear about, talk about: ADHD, dyslexia, double jointedness, other issues, maybe some people born with like birth defects where one of the fingers is a little bit curved. These are the kinds of things that you can work to address after probably a lot of struggle, but once you figure out what works for one student, who knows, maybe in 10 years another one will come along and you'll know exactly, like you're saying, exactly what to do.
Yeah.
Exactly what to try to help that student, because everyone's different, even if they have a similar disability or special need or something like that. But it's worth a shot once you find something that works for the first person that you encounter like that.
Yeah, for sure, right? It's all about just gaining the experience, and so much of this has to just be done. It has to be experienced, right? You can't necessarily, you can only get so much from listening to people talk about it or having someone explain how to teach something. And some of this stuff just has to be experienced. It has to be lived for you to figure that stuff out. And everyone has their own bag of tricks for what works and what doesn't work. You know, one of the most interesting things that I learned in college was one of our professors had a performance science center, and there he had a lot of interesting tools. But one of the tools he had was he would hook different parts of your muscles up to these I guess electrodes, and then he had a machine that would measure how much that muscle is being used. And I was working on a B flat major well-tempered clavier, the first book, the B flat major prelude and fugue, and that prelude has just this very fast repeated section. It has the whole first page is all about that. And I got into a situation where my muscles would physically refuse to keep going, because I was from the very instant I started playing, I was building up tension. And that tension was just continuing to build the entire time, right? This tension was just building the entire time, and I would get like 16 measures in, and I could not move because my muscles were all just clenched, and they were all just being used, right? And he said something to me. He said that, you know, the solution to this, you know, your solution, you might think that the solution here is to stop clenching, right? That the solution here is to stop using these muscles. But that's from the wrong perspective. Because if you are focusing on stopping something, you're acknowledging that you are starting it in the first place. You're doing it. So the solution here is not to stop clenching, it's to never clench in the first place, right? So when someone has flyaway fingers, right, like when someone's evil pinky going on, right, I ask them, and like, what do you think? Why do you think your pinky's doing that, right? What's causing that? And they're like, I don't know. It just seems to have a mind of its own, right? Like I'm playing and it's just lifting up, and then I ask, so, you know, when any part of your body moves, right? When any part of your body moves, unless someone else is physically moving it for you, what or who is causing that, right? And they'll say, well, I am, right? I'm causing my body to move. And I'm like, yeah, right? But our brain sends electrical signals to our muscles, and our muscles contract. And we are the brain. So our brain is the one that is lifting that pinky. You are lifting that pinky. Your solution is not to put it down. It's to find the part of your brain that's lifting it up and stop doing that. Right? You've already kind of lost if you're focusing on putting that pinky back down, right? Because that is a response to something, which is, you know, 2 steps, right? You're lifting it up, then you're putting it down, right? So that's 2-step process. And then I use this analogy that it's inspired by Inside Out. Have you seen Inside Out, the movie? I said, imagine that there's this frazzled, just this crazy person with crazy hair in your brain, right? And that person is responsible for moving every single one of your muscles. They have this massive wall of light switches, right? And you need to move your arm, and they flick on the switch to move your arm, right? And if you stop using your arm, then they turn that switch off. Now, they're very used to flipping 5 switches at once when you use your hand, right? Because when you write, you use all 5 fingers. When you hold something, you use all 5 fingers. When you do anything, when you drive, everything, you're using all 5 of your fingers at once. There really are no tasks in your life where you are responsible for moving one of your fingers at a time, right? Without clenching the rest or doing something with the other fingers, right? And you need to find those 5 light switches, and you need to practice just turning on one of them at a time. And I give them this technique exercise. I call it finger lifts, where they just rest on the piano and they practice just lifting one finger at a time. It's very hard to do it floating, but
suggest finger lifts on a tabletop. It's the best way to isolate each finger.
Yeah, and they need to literally practice just using that muscle, because that same professor, he was very into, Dr. Watson.
Yeah.
Dr. Watson, he's very into the neuroscience behind it all as well. And he explained how when all of our skills are neural pathways in our brain, right? Just connections of neurons that get stronger the more we do that thing. And they don't have a neural pathway for using just one of their fingers at a time, right? That is a brand new skill for them. It's very easy for us as piano teachers to just forget that, right? Because we've done it so long, and it just seems like second nature to us. Of course, just use one of your fingers, right? But that, in and of itself, is such a fundamentally different thing that they don't do. So giving them an exercise like finger lifts, where you just put your hand down in the shape and lift one finger at a time, is a great place to start with students that are just having difficulty moving only one or two of, one of their fingers at a time without getting a reaction out of the other four, right?
Listeners at home, take notes, finger lifts. If you have not already done this exercise with your students, and
that's part of my warm-up.
It's so incredibly effective. Even if it's just at the breakfast table, you can have a student do it on their own, at their house, on their own time, away from the keyboard, even at their desk in school. Whenever they have a moment, you can coach them to do this at some point, and I guarantee, for all the reasons that Jackie outlined, and more, it is so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, because, and I'm going to fire back about Hannon. Don't be Hannon. Don't completely misunderstand the anatomy of our body, right? Some 4 and 5 are tricky fingers because they're anatomically linked, right? You cannot contract your number 5 finger without also contracting number 4, right? You cannot move it. It is physically impossible. So you cannot develop true finger independence, Hannon. So those 4 and 5, especially number 4, right? You could probably ask some of your more experienced students to just try to do finger lifts and just pick up number 4. And I can't guarantee, but likely on their very first attempt, they will also lift up finger number 5, or their entire hand will buckle as they are engaging muscles to try to keep the other 4 fingers from also lifting, right? So it's very much about this skill that is just, it's not something they've ever had to do. When does someone ever need to just use their ring finger? Right? Like just their ring finger for anything, right? It's very important to recognize that there are these fundamental skills that people just don't have. I mean, they need to learn this fundamental skill.
Otherwise, we can't expect them to, apply that in the repertoire, in the exercises. So, one way to take the mental load off during these exercises that actually require quite a lot of brain power because it's so new, like you're saying, is just to, have them focus on what it feels like, and react. Just react. Mentally, emotionally, and ask, how does it feel? How does that feel? Is it comfortable? Is it awkward? Why might that be? And that takes some of the pressure off of them also, because it's just isolating one new skill, not having to combine it with the worry of, hey, am I getting the right key? Is it the right amount of volume, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about scales. I don't know if it was last week or the week before. We talked about scales. But scales are so great because they don't need to look at music. They don't need to think about rhythm. They don't need to think about these things. They can just focus on staying steady, getting an even sound, and looking at their hands. And I will admit that that is one of the things that Hanon is good for, right? It is very good for helping students check out from the music, but you have to make sure they also don't check out of the technique, right? Because scales don't use the same patterns that Hanon does, right? Hanon has 60 different patterns, right? 60 different patterns of using fingers in different ways. And that's incredibly useful under supervision. But I have had so many people, they're like, so many adult students, I went on the piano subreddit and I bought a Hanon book. I've been playing for 2 weeks. My hands hurt. Like, what am I doing wrong? It was like, you need to stop playing Hanon. You've been taking lessons. You've been learning for 2 weeks. Stop doing that. Like, I just thought like it would stop hurting if I did it more. Oh God.
No, you gotta listen to your body, and that's another reason that you get, level appropriate etudes. You can practice etudes at any level. It's just a matter of finding etudes and exercises that are gonna work for you, depending on what level you're in.
Yeah. Absolutely, right? Like, it's definitely important for us to be level appropriate, right? Be level appropriate and to absolutely throw things at our students at all times. We need to do it all the time, not just when they're messing up with their fingertips, but instead of saying hello, just throw something at your student. What I'm basically saying is the key to good technique is that they need to have things thrown at them.
Oh my goodness. So it's totally not a fear factor, right?
No. Well, you see, I mean, my teacher in college, Allison Edwards, she told me that she used to just cry before all of her piano lessons, because she didn't want to disappoint them. I've had another teacher from high school. I practiced till my fingers bled. Oh my gosh. So, don't do those things. Don't terrify your students, but playfully throw things at them in a whimsical way. We need to start wrapping up, I think. Let's do our big takeaways here. My big takeaway is throwing things. What is yours, Arianne?
Well, I don't know if I have it in me to act on that takeaway personally. I think my takeaway is like a lot of technique. There are so many tricks you can use and employ to achieve the technique outcomes in your students that you want, and a lot of it can be nonverbal, a lot of it can be away from the keyboard, a lot of it can be mental coaching, and if you're that kind of person, a lot of it could be throwing things.
Yeah, but seriously, my takeaway here, I think, is that you need. I don't know if I can do just one takeaway. I think that first of all, you need to put yourself, and I know this is very difficult. You need to put yourself in the perspective that doesn't know all the things that you do, right? And you have to recognize that there are fundamental skills that are more fundamental than we think, right? Keeping our fingers relaxed is not as basic as it gets, right? There's a level below that. The level below that is learning to control each finger independently, right? And sure, we know that, but we don't necessarily connect it with the fact that they're just not used to doing that things with their muscles, right? I remember it's become kind of a joke with me and my partner that one of my lessons during COVID, during online lessons with my piano teacher in college, she said, "You need to discover your shoulders," and I started laughing because I'm like, what do you mean? I know where my shoulders, they're the same place they've always been. And she said, I know, but are you aware of what they're doing? And I said, I guess not, right? Like, I guess not. And I wasn't aware of my shoulders. And when I did become aware of my shoulders, I was able to relax them, and it worked, right? But it's become a bit of a joke that whenever I'm practicing, my partner will says, do you know where your shoulders are? But that is that fundamental thing. These are muscles that are unconscious. No one ever thinks about grasping things and the 5 different fingers that are moving. They just do the thing. And now the thing is much more precise. It is much more precise than they've ever had to do. And if they're a child, they're not used to using their body. They're not used to doing these precise things. And if they're an adult, it doesn't get any better because they're very used to doing things the other way. They've been doing it the other way their entire life, right? For 20 years, they've been grasping cups and holding the steering wheel and writing, and they've been doing this their entire life. So we need to not unlearn. That's not the right word, because you can't ever unlearn anything, right? You just create a new neural pathway that is stronger than the one that they've used for 40 years. That takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, and just a lot of consistency, right? And it cannot be something that you only monitor for them at the lesson. The lesson is like 10% of their weekly practice time, hopefully, maybe 20% of their weekly practice time, right? So maybe 30, it depends on the student. But it's a minority. Hopefully we can say that. It is a minority of the amount of time that they spend at the piano is at the lesson. Hopefully. So the majority of their habits are formed outside of your studio. They have to look at their own hands. They have to monitor things. And that means doing exercises where they're not reading a book, right? Whether it's Hanon or just scale practice or something else, but it just needs to have a pattern that's easily memorizable, is that a word? And just that they can focus on looking at their hands and building those connections that, remember, they've never had to do, right? We ask them to do so many things that they've never had to do before. And it's so easy for us to forget that because it comes so naturally to us. We remember things like reading music. Yes, they don't know how to do that. I have to teach them how to do that. But then sometimes we're just like, well, why don't you just use your hand the right way? Because they don't know how. They don't know how on a fundamental level that is far more basic than we not give them credit for, than that we really teach. So exercises like finger lifts or technique gestures that they can be like, okay, this part of my piece, I need to use this technique gesture. If you're not already aware, look into the Piano Adventures technique and artistry books. It's a great way to have level appropriate technique gestures that you can then build a library for them of different techniques that they can use.
Speaking of which, if you're listening at home, also I would recommend checking out this book by Seymour Fink, Mastering Piano Technique. It has a lot of diagrams about, just the way that our physiological selves connect with the piano, and a lot of pretty cool explanations of the way the body works, the way that we can use different methods and exercises and notes outlined in the book itself to help form our technique. Even though we're professional musicians, it's not like we've learned every single thing there is to learn about technique in the world. There's so many neurological studies and bio studies and physiology studies and kinesiology studies that we can still educate ourselves on to become better performers ourselves as teachers. So do look into Mastering Piano Technique by Seymour Fink, and I know there are quite a few other pieces of pretty solid literature out there.
I'm going to throw my hat into the ring here as well. There's a trilogy of books by Murray McLaughlin, and they are The Foundation of Technique, The Psychology of Technique, and Piano Technique in Practice. And I read these 3 books cover to cover during my time in college, and they're broken down into ways of understanding. I mean, the Foundation of Piano Technique has chapters like, where is it? Alignment, finger independence, the thumb. It has 3 chapters on the different articulations, finger strength, scales, arpeggios, broken chords, ornaments, double thirds, repeat. It has just, breaks down different ways of approaching every single thing that we do. And obviously these are targeted at very advanced students, but as a piano teacher, you can understand these and then see how you can apply those to your younger students, your less experienced students, your adult students. But don't be afraid, like Arianne was saying, don't be afraid to talk to your students, right? Don't be afraid to talk to your students. Actually, early on, Arianne was saying that she doesn't talk to her students, but then she was talking about talking to her students. So you should talk to your students, you should not talk to your students, and you should throw things at your students. But don't be afraid to talk to them, especially adults, right? Adults, more than children, they like to know how things work, why things work the way they do. And they don't need all of the information you have. You can't give them all of the information you have on finger strength or finger independence, but you can give them simplified explanations and tell them the why behind why you're doing things, right? If you went home, well, not home, if you went to work, well, you could be at home, if you asked your students, why do you practice scales? I guarantee that they all will not have an answer for you. Maybe Arianne's students, because she loves scales so much. But I think that our listeners, if you asked every one of your students, why do I have you practice scales? I don't think they would all be able to give you a satisfactory answer, right? Because, I mean, it's just, you're not perfect. You can't do everything. You can't explain everything. But that is something that they should know. They should absolutely know why they're practicing scales. And, don't be afraid to talk to your students as well as demonstrating. Demonstrations are very powerful, but understanding the why allows them to take it beyond just mimicry, just copycat, right? And understand the why behind it.
The why will explain also to all the beginners who start out in high school, who want to learn pop and they're playing chords with 1-4-5 instead of 1-3-5 or 1-2-4, for instance. The why is so key. Otherwise, your students, if they're just expected to take your word for it, they'll never really know why 1-4-5 or 2-4-5 or whatever the heck they do. I don't know why they do it that way. Why that might be the path of most resistance when you're
we probably should have done this at the beginning, but in closing, how would you define, in a few words, maybe a couple sentences, in the least amount of words, how do you define piano technique?
The way I would define piano technique is your physical understanding and mental philosophy on things such as gesture, articulation, the way that the human body must interact with this machine, really, this piano, this instrument, and the physiology of that fusion.
Gotcha. I use very much fewer words, and the definition I like to give my students is that piano technique is I'll use more words, the mechanism that we achieve our desired sound in the laziest way possible.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
in the laziest way we can, right? Achieving a desired sound in the least amount of effort, right?
And different countries might have a different philosophy on that, because there is something to be said for a slightly extra effort for showmanship's sake. But we're not too focused on flashy gestures here in the West, I've noticed.
I have been known. I have been known to be flashy at times, but yeah, I mean, even that, it's okay. I'll change it. Achieving the desired effect in the laziest way possible, right? And if your desired effect is to have a flourish, well, then do that flourish, right? But the desired effect generally means like even sound. We want to do that in the least amount of effort, using the fewest muscles, right? So achieving the desired effect using the laziest method possible. All right, well, any last thoughts, Arianne?
Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, I think, what do you think? Do you think that this single topic, less structured approach, do you think that's the way to go?
Oh yeah, I think we were on the same wavelength a bit more than previous podcasts. You know, listeners, we're still figuring it out. This is just our fifth one? Sixth one?
I think this is our fourth one. Fifth one, maybe? Yeah, and I think that this is good. So we'll do another unified topic next week, and I think that might be our approach for most of our episodes. Because I agree. I think that the free form method and just the talking went a little bit better, rather than me trying to hit the points that I wanted to hit on my topic. And as interesting as it was to have two unrelated topics in the same episode, I don't really think that it was 100% successful, because it just felt so jarring going from one topic to another.
Yeah, this way we'll be on the same wavelength from start to finish in each podcast episode, and that's how the magic happens. So guys, let us know maybe potentially what you would like us to discuss also, for those of you listening and watching.
All right, well, we'll see you guys next week.